talk to people who are in those management leadership roles that you aspire to be in. What got them there? What are the top 3 skills that they use every week that they attribute their success to? Because what got you into a manager role probably isn't going to keep you or advance you in a management role. You just need to keep expanding your skill set.
Welcome to the Made Leader Podcast, where exceptional leadership isn't about who you are, but who you choose to become. Join your host, Jen Arnold, for expert interviews, real-world stories, and practical advice that transforms managers into exceptional leaders. If you're a middle manager ready to unlock your potential, this is your podcast. Let's get started.
Hey there, and welcome to the Made Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Jen Arnold. If you've been in your leadership role for a while now, doing good work, managing your team well, but maybe that promotion that you've been hoping for is just not happening, this episode is for you. Today, I'm joined by guest Karen Suchsland, who's back on the podcast to tackle one of the most frustrating challenges middle managers face: why you're not getting promoted and what you can actually do about it. I mean, when you think about it, there's a lot more middle managers than there are maybe VPs or whatever that next step above is for you. And you got to do all the right things, and you never quite know what those right things are. But we're going to take a stab at some of the things that we recommend. Unfortunately, doing a good job at your current role isn't enough to get you promoted. That's just expected of you. And we'll walk through the real reasons why promotions stagnate and give you an idea on how you can troubleshoot your situation and do some reflection. Now, a few things that you're going to learn in this episode. Karen bust out a stat about the average time to promotion being about 30 months. We're going to talk about if the role that you want even exists at your company, and the difference between being visible and being visible in the right way. And then, of course, with any career story, you're in the driver's seat. And so how can you build the kind of relationships that get your name mentioned when you're not in the room? One of the things I'm doing with this podcast as well is they are video podcasts. So they're all also on YouTube where Karen and I are talking. And during this one, I experimented with documenting some of the things that we were talking about. So there is a little companion guide for this episode, and it'll give you a checklist so you can look and see maybe if you're getting frustrated that you're not getting promotion. You can download the checklist and just take a look. Reflect, see if there's something that you can do differently to potentially get ahead in the future. So I'll link that up in the show notes, and you can download that at your leisure. Now, without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with Karen Suchsland. Karen Suchsland, welcome back to the Made Leader Podcast. Glad to have you back on.
Happy to be here.
All right. Today we are talking about why you're not getting promoted in a leadership role. So you're a leader, and you're noticing that your growth has been a little stagnant. So I thought we could maybe bucket this, if you will, into 2 categories. And the first being, how can leaders who are listening maybe troubleshoot or reflect on their current situation? So you want to kick us off?
Sure.
I am going to start documenting these. So as soon as you start giving tips, there'll be a screen. So just so everyone knows, we're taking notes for you. And then we'll link it up in the description if they want to grab what I'm typing up.
Great. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you use the word reflect. Because really, I think the first step is doing a lot of self-reflection and figuring out what really is your driver. Do you want to get paid more? Are you feeling like you're in an inequitable pay situation? Do you want more responsibility? Do you want title and status? Do you want a combination of all 3? Think about, how long have I been in that role? If I've just been in a role for a year, you're probably not ready. And that's just not my opinion. So a company called Standout CV did a analysis from career histories on LinkedIn of high market capitalization companies. And they looked at these folks and they determined that the average is about 30.4 months in a current role to get promoted, which I've always kind of in my head, when I'm looking at people on my team, use kind of like the 2.5 to 3 year window. So you have to understand, where are you currently in your role? And in your current role, is there, like as a manager, is there a manager track? So what are those levels? If Are you a team lead? Are you a manager? Do you have a supervisor? Is there a director role, an AVP, a VP? So what is the structure of the company? And what is the culture of the company? So what's the tenure of the people in those roles? It's like, well, it's on average at our company, it takes people 10 years to get promoted. That's not my current company. I'll just say, using that as an example, not to scare people away. So I think you need to understand kind of the overall landscape, and then start, once you have that kind of factored out, go out and elicit feedback. Talk to people who are in those management leadership roles that you aspire to be in. What got them there? What are the top 3 skills that they use every week that they attribute their success to? Because what got you into a manager role probably isn't going to keep you or advance you in a management role. You just need to keep expanding your skill set. And
Yeah.
I would say you then need to have an openness to reflection. There's that word again, back on that feedback, and actually take action on it. And not, when people say, oh, here's the narrative on you, you're not a strong facilitator, or you're not, you need to sit back and go, well, yeah, I guess there is some truth to that. And that's going to be a key part of this new role. So how do I go build those skills?
Yeah, I think that, what I have a lot of things, troubleshooting, reflection. We'll get into the steps in a minute. So we'll come back to the getting some feedback, but I think it's really important to talk to the people and the roles you want. But getting back to that troubleshooting and reflection, one of the things that I have on my list is the role you want promotable? So let me explain what I mean by that, because this is what happened to me. And it's actually why I left my job, is that I was in a job I loved. Like, I was a manager, and I loved my team, loved what I did, but I could not get promoted in that role. So my boss knew I wanted to. He advocated for me. I really do think he did. HR was saying, nope, not happening. And so one of the things that my boss told me was, hey, Jen, I can get you that director role, because I was a manager. You just have to go to marketing, or you have to go back to healthcare, or you have to go get in this other role. And then for me, it was a question of, I don't want that role. So going back to what you said, that wasn't really my driver. I need to see growth and opportunity. I need to see growth and development.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I just needed that next step. It couldn't be stagnant. But I'd say for troubleshooting, and I'm going to add this to the document, is do you want to go higher? You want to keep your role as is, but you still want a promotion?
Right.
That's not always possible.
Correct. And you have to understand that. And I think to your point, and you're an example of this, you took that information in and helped determine, well, no, I don't want to go work in a different department, or go back to a department. I, I have to leave to get what I want. And that's okay. And I've had people, on my team that were, trying to chase a promotion that doesn't exist. It didn't exist. It's just like, these are the roles that we have. So, similar to what your leader did, you try to work with the people and say, well, here's where you can use those skills in different ways, and think a little bit broader, just from, I want to do the same thing, but I want to get promoted for it. Because typically that's not going to work out so well.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking back, you're going, yeah, I guess that didn't really make a lot of sense. I think the role wasn't banded correctly, but hey, that's another, that's a 8-year-old story that has no bearing on my current status. I think one thing that I have seen people, you've seen this in non-leadership roles too, I have, but I think some people want to be promoted when they're just doing a good job, right? So like you are supposed to do a good job. So if you think you're going to get promoted because hey, I'm doing a great job at my job, that may not be worth being promoted. So I always recommend is leaders to think about, how are you being strategic? How are you adding to the business? How are you thinking differently and bringing new opportunities, not just doing a good job at your job, because that is expected.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think if you were to ask anybody that's a hiring manager, oh, why'd you hire this person? Because I thought they were going to do an adequate job.
Or even a good job, right? You're like, yes, I expect them to do a good
That
job.
it's like, no, I'm trying to get the best candidate in here that's gonna, come in and do a great job. That is the expectation, not just like, "Ooh, okay, they're okay. I'll take the most okay employee." So I think people have to really give it some thought and determine, okay, what is it I'm trying to get to and why? And it takes time. And if you're not table stakes, if you're not high performing in your current role, it might be the wrong role for you. But you should not be knocking on the door saying, I want to be promoted when you're not taking care of standard housekeeping in your current role.
Yes, yes. Like, do your job well, and then find other things that are going to get you recognized or noticed, or adding value to the organization, because that's what it's all about. Um, you know, Another thing for people to consider is, how visible are you?
Yeah,
So as you're being strategic and as you're doing all the things, we talked about before we started recording that politics still matters. Like, you need to be visible in
absolutely.
making. Yeah.
And there's visibility within your current team and your current division, but there's also looking for those opportunities that give you visibility across the company or across divisions, depending on how large your company is. And there's a multitude of ways that you can go get there. And I don't want to skip to the tactics part of it.
We're not
But
there yet, Karen.
sure, yeah. So I will hold on that. But visibility is a big part of it, because a lot of times these promotion decisions are not the singular purview of a manager or a director or your vice president saying, well, I want to promote Jen. Usually you're sitting around with department heads and kind of saying, okay, what do you got? I've got 3 people I want to promote. Well, okay, well, in this budget cycle, we only have room for 2. Make your case. Well, if I, as a leader, have had indirect experience, I know who you are. I know some of the work that you've done. I've heard about your accomplishments. You might not report to me, but I've heard about it. So then you're more apt to say, oh, yeah, I have a point of reference, and that you can call it politics, whatever it is, it makes a difference.
Absolutely. I mean, it's visibility. We used to talk at our leadership meetings about the people on our team, right? Who's doing really well? Who may be ready for something on another team? Or we always talked about that. My last boss was really good about bringing that up in conversation. So all of us as leaders were talking and if they kept hearing a name, or they would say, hey, that person because we were very collaborative we were a sales team.
Yeah.
So-and-so did a great job with this client. Then their name starts getting brought up, and that matters.
And it has to be visible in the right way, right?
Wait, say more.
So you want it to be visible, and you want to be tied to adding or creating value. So you don't want to be the person, and I have been in these leadership, large scale leadership meetings with leaders, and you could sit there and before the Q&A opens, write down 4 people that are going to, like, as soon as they open up the floor for questions, to ask a question. And that, attempting to be visible. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but you have to be conscious of, are you asking a relevant question? Are you asking, what is the purpose behind that? Not just to be heard and not just to be visible. Like, there has to be some meat and weight behind it.
Yeah, I'm writing this down. So I'm going to go over these at the end. But yeah, don't ask a question just to ask a question. I had a previous podcast on this. It's like, how do you have executive presence? And it's not just raising your hand just to, to
Right.
be noticed. But yeah, hey, me.
What book are you currently reading?
I was thinking too, like anyone, I got lost a little bit in this when I was a leader is connecting to the organization's goals. I kind of would do my own thing and go, "Oh, our team's doing great." But how are you? And this is kind of in the strategic note that I brought up earlier. But how are you helping the organization succeed? So not
Yeah.
staying in your little bubble.
And I think one is truly have an understanding of where the company direction is going and
Mhm.
what is your team's role in enabling that function and how can you support that? And then tying that to your story. So as you're talking to your leaders or peers about accomplishments of, hey, there's a goal out there that we have to, cut expenses by 15%. Well, our team, we did this, this, and this, and we actually drove it down by 25%. Oh, okay. That
Mhm.
right there, you're adding value. Or we partnered with another division to eliminate a bunch of waste in this process just by us, working together. So that shows collaboration. So it's just looking for those opportunities to tie what you're doing to the overall mission. And if you don't
Mhm.
understand and it's not clear, then you need to be working with your leadership to understand that clarity and say, well, how does that fit in with my role? Because if you as a leader don't understand how your team is contributing to the overall goals of the company, your employees sure as heck don't. And that makes it very hard for them to be successful.
Yeah, yeah, they need to see that vision. That's your job as a leader to give them a vision of what you're trying to accomplish. So, let me, here's what we got. So, let's see. Let's go do a little bit of a list here. So, it's on my screen. Checklist. What's your driver, right? So, I'll clean this up before I share it. But, kind of what is driving your need for a promotion in the first place? How long have you been in your role? You found from some data it's average about 30 months, but that's specific to your organization, right? Take a look around and see how long it takes people to get promoted. Is there a manager track? Like, is it, like a succession of
Yeah.
if, where it starts, where it ends? What's the culture? Look around you. Is what you want, is the role you want promotable? So that was my role. It really wasn't promotable, but I wanted it to be. How are you adding value? How visible are you across the organization in a good way, the good visibility? And that how are you helping the organization succeed? Can you tie what your team is doing to the overall mission? We got to miss anything? Those are my main points, but anything?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary.
All right. So if we're telling people, all right, cool. After you've reflected on these things, you need to get to work. You've already mentioned, I love this one. So I want to make sure we go back to this. Talk to the people in the roles you want.
Yeah.
So go to them. And what would you ask them? You said, what skills did they need in this role versus that role?
Yeah. What is the most, challenging thing in their role that they have to deal with every day? Is it, what makes up a role? So as a manager and a leader, if you're not in that role, you might have a very different view of the day to day, what that is. It's like, yeah, no, I am spending a lot of my time, clearing obstacles for folks on my team and dealing with escalated issues. Or, 20% of my job is dealing with conflict. Well, if I'm hearing this and interested in management and I hate conflict, might not be the right role for you, or might be an opportunity for how do I get better at that skill. Um,
Mhm.
it- but you can't just assume from observing a leader in a meeting that you know what their day to day is. And I would also say, especially these days with the way technology is entering into the equation and things change so rapidly is understanding what skills those leaders are working on to develop in themselves to grow in their current roles.
Hmm.
Because that's, where they're heading. So you need to keep that in mind as you're building out your own personal plan for, how do I want to own this? Because it is you have to own it on your side. Yes, you're dependent upon, people to make those decisions, but you own your own story and how you tell it. And you have to be a truth teller to yourself and say, yeah, I can do this and have a belief.
Yeah. Yes, I like that thought because hopefully at every level, people are still growing, whether
Yeah.
they're at the executive team, VP, or whatever. I'm going to go to a step that seems kind of obvious, but I don't think people do it always, is to state that you want to advance with a company. Don't go in there and say, "Hey, I want a promotion." That's
Right.
different, right? But if you go in there, if you don't express your needs or your wants to your boss, how are they ever supposed to know? So if you're going in there saying, "Hey, I love this company. I would love to advance with this company. Here's why, but state it. And then getting back to your early point asking for feedback, but what advice do you have for me knowing this?
And I would say, and be explicit in what advance means to you,
Mhm.
right? So currently I'm a manager of 2 teams of 15. I really, my goal in my next role is I would like to have managers reporting to me and have, managing multiple functions. Cause right now I manage customer service. And in the future, I also want to not only manage customer service, but I want to have a secondary division. I want to broaden, my reach across the organization. That's very different from saying, I want to advance in the company. So the more you can be explicit as to what you're looking for,
Mhm.
the more your current leader can kind of help you craft, okay, is that in this role or is that, and they keep you in mind, right?
Yep.
So I think it's incumbent upon you, as you said, to express those desires and to have that as a regular part of the conversation, because I have had people that have worked with me on my teams and, there was a ceiling of kind of for that role, what you were going to do. But they had expressed interest to me. Well, I was out there looking on the internal job postings and I would encourage, I'm like, oh, this might be a good fit for you. I don't know if you've thought about it, but this would be some of the things that I've heard you talk about.
Mhm.
Because for me, it is so much better for a person that has that intellectual knowledge and to be retained within the company, regardless of, they might not stay with you. In fact,
You
you
don't
don't
want
want
them to.
people to stay with you forever.
Yeah.
You want them to grow. And it's very satisfying to see them, but you want to keep them in the company.
Mhm.
And so you help them think about things that they might not have thought were options.
Right. And it could also expose some holes in their plans, right? So let's just say someone says, "Oh, I'd really like to lead more functions," and they're barely holding on to their one function, right?
Yes.
That's great. That's something great to know about your person and go, "Okay, thank you so much. Here's what we need to work on first," right? The first step is get your own department in order, your own team in order first, right? So I think that's just such a wonderful conversation for a leader to have with their people to have with them. Um,
And I think some of it is understanding what knowledge do you need. So, back when I was a project manager, you don't need to have, at least in my experience, I did not need to have a tremendous depth of technical knowledge. There are people on the team that have that technical knowledge. What I needed to have, and fortunately I did have, was intellectual curiosity. And I wanted to understand at at a level in which I could effectively ask questions, but I didn't need to be in the details. And if you had told me years prior, I would have maybe thought, well, I can't do that because I don't have that technical knowledge. But by talking to people, they're like, oh, no, you don't need to know that. This is the part of your job is keeping people on track, facilitating meetings, working a plan. Oh, okay, I can do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think those are important things to consider. And I think asking for that advice, I read something recently. It was, I'm always about ask your boss for feedback. Like, where do you see me, where I need to grow, that type thing. But I heard it recently. It's from Adam Grant. And he said, instead of asking for feedback, ask for advice.
Right.
And so what's your advice in me getting there, right? What's your advice in keeping that conversation up there? But something you said earlier, I want to go back to is if you're going to ask for advice, if you're going to ask for feedback, do something with it, take some action, be
Right.
intellectually curious.
Yeah, because there's been
Be
times
coachable.
where, you know, as a leader, people have come to me for advice or guidance, and I've provided that. And then, you know, observationally, you watch what transpires and nothing happens. And then they come back in 3 months or 6, and they're like, I never wrote, what can I? And I'm like, did you do X, Y, and Z? No, I didn't think I needed to do that. All right. So then what are we doing here?
Mhm.
And I think I like the point about with Adam Grant about asking advice, because I also think a lot of managers struggle with giving feedback,
Yeah, that's going to be a whole nother conversation because
especially when it's developmental. Um, you get the sandwich, you get the compliment, and
do not get me started on the
I
sandwich.
know, but it's like you really have to be open to receiving that feedback and hearing it. And I think, but you also need to seek it out from multiple people, right? So
Yes, yes, yes.
if you hear it from one person and that's, a narrative from like 3 years ago, and you had a bad experience, and this person's still playing that tape, but you talk to 4 other people and they think, oh no, you're a great communicator, or um, you have to balance it out. There's not just one voice that's going to tell you the answer.
Well, it's trends, right? It's like if you ask a bunch of people and you're noticing some trends, oh, okay, everyone's noticing that. But because you need to know, because one of the, I talked to a recent person, as chief people officer. She was promoted into a chief people officer from a director role. And I think it was director, VP. I don't know. I'll
Yeah.
link up the
Got
podcast.
promoted. That's
But
good.
she got promoted. But one of the things she said, it was my peers. I had the ability to collaborate with my peers, had a good reputation with my peers, and that means a lot. So I think a lot of times we think of just getting advice from the higher ups. Yes, important, but what about your peers? Because that shows that you were really looking to grow and develop. If you're asking people, hey, what do you think of this, right? What's your advice for this?
Yeah, everybody should have an advisory board that's made up of, people within different levels of the organization, and your trusted advisors that can help you and provide that feedback. And that's what's going to help you grow if you take that to heart.
Again, if you do something with it. And would you say that would be the same? Because you mentioned before we started recording, you're talking about a sponsor and not an AA sponsor unless you need one. That is very important if you need that. But like getting a sponsor or a mentor, or how do you distinguish that between an advisory board?
Yeah, I think an advisory board, I look at, kind of, I want to get advice or I want to get feedback, blah, blah. When I'm talking about kind of the sponsor or the advocate, that's really somebody in a senior level position within the company that you've built a relationship with, that is actively aware of your accomplishments, aware of your strengths, that is helping you navigate, and is putting your name forward, frankly, of, hey, I think they're ready for this opportunity. Can we do that? And sometimes that's your direct manager that can help do that. Sometimes it's a level 1 or 2 above, depending on, situations of how you've been able to, build that relationship. And it could have started from a mentoring perspective. If you were an entry level employee and went through a mentoring program and established this relationship with this person and then continued to cultivate that relationship, they can be advocating on your behalf. But I think you need, and again, it ties back to politics, that people need to be able to know your story to help sell it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say that, and you don't always realize it at the time, but I had a good leader who would do that for me. Ginger, shout out Ginger. She would always try to find somebody higher level in the organization to help me out, to connect me with, and it really does matter, and
Mhm.
it's appreciated. I think the only other thing I have to mention is to consider what you're willing to put up with and or tolerate, if you will. Like, let's just say that you look around and you're like, okay, well, there's no chance in hell I'm getting promoted in the next 10 years. All right. Are you good with that? Do you need to take on projects just to keep you entertained and growing and developing? Have you tried all these things and you're like, it's still going nowhere? You know, look around. You don't have to stay in the organization. Although, if you're listening to this at this time in 2025, our unemployment rates are pretty high. I just read this morning they're as high as they were COVID time.
Yeah.
First, like when they were laying everyone off. So now is probably not the time to go looking for another job unless someone's coming to seek you out. But I think it's just to understand the surroundings and go, okay, do I need to leave to get what I want?
And I would say doing that and going through that, maintaining your sense of positivity and professionalism and poise, and
Yes.
and not getting angry, or focus on what you can control.
Hmm.
And it may be, what, I can't control that I'm to get promoted within this company, but I can control that I'm going to learn 2 new skills within the coming year, or I'm going to get a certification, or I'm going to start exploring what opportunities exist in other industries or
Mhm.
in other companies. And that's okay. But you still have to remember how you show up day to day at your current job.
Yeah, don't get all pissy about it.
Right.
You need to be professional and, I
Because we've
remember
all
going.
worked with some people that you're like, yeah, they need to go because they just can't redirect in a positive way to drive themselves forward.
Yeah, and when I had to go through a whole, like, a time where I kept thinking I'd get promoted, so there's this period of hope, and then I felt like when it was actually very clear to me, "Jen, you have these options." That's when I said, "Okay, I'm going to take a different path, I'm gonna leave," right? I think I was still professional the whole time, but sometimes it's just like this. Sometimes it's not clear, it's fuzzy for a while, and you have hope, and then it's taken away, and then you have hope. So, as clear as you can get on the
Yeah.
possibilities, the realities, maintaining your professionalism, but then ultimately saying, "Okay, focus on what I can control, and here's how I'm gonna act regardless."
And I think if you have the opportunity to, work for a leader that can be somewhat explicit in kind of providing that feedback of what it would take to get to the next level, like, oh, you need to um, show where you have delivered on time, or you've managed through adversity and, diminished resources, and how you were able to be successful doing that. Then you need to, if they've laid out that plan for you, you need to make sure when you're having your one-on-ones or your reviews that you're orienting your achievements towards those things, so that
Mhm.
you're demonstrating, yeah, I heard you say, I really need to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Well, here's 2 examples this quarter of how I did X, and this is what I'm working on. So,
Yeah, keep that top of mind because they have short memories. What's important to us and what we're thinking about all the time, like your leaders, your peers, like the higher ups are not thinking about you. So as much as you can bring it to their attention in a professional way, that's centering the organization. A better way to say it is putting the organization at the center, not you at the center.
And I would say my advice for leaders, for people that are having staff, team members come to them and asking for opportunities, please be realistic and don't, sugarcoat, don't false promise. Because, as you just said, you went through situations where, there was hope, there wasn't hope, there was, and you're just like, yeah, this is now just becomes lip service.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just have to be brutally honest and say, look, for this role, we're not expanding what this role does. So this is it.
This is it. Yep. Yeah. And sometimes that's just what you have to hear. And it is just part of a career, right? So if we had to recap, let me get my trusty document here. Steps to take. So our advice for people, asking why you're not getting promoted, going back to talk to the people in the roles you want. What skills do they have? What's the most challenging part of your role? Getting to know their day to day. I'm going to rearrange this when I put this out there, but tell them, be very explicit in what you're trying to do, what advancement means to you, what's your advice, taking action on the feedback. If someone's giving you feedback and they're going to, because it's painful for people, if they're going to give you feedback or advice, do something with it. Get an advisory board and or get a sponsor or an advocate that, they can say your name when you're not in the room. And then just asking yourself, do you need to leave to get what you want? Maintaining your professionalism the whole way through. Otherwise, you're never going to get promoted and you're going to damage your reputation potentially. What else? Anything else that you missed?
So one thing I would two things kind of I would add to that. One, we talked about visibility, and I think there's a lot of ways to do that. So either, by the work you get assigned or by your leadership. But there's also a ton of ways you can do that informally. A lot of companies now have employee networks where you can take on a leadership role in that, and that's a great way to grow your leadership skills. You can look to volunteer if they're doing special events or special projects. Look to volunteer on those and how you can get involved. And then really I can't say this enough, and maybe it is because I'm a learner by nature, but continuing to upskill yourself and develop your skills and keeping aware of what's happening not only within the company, within the industry, what tools do I need to understand? A lot of companies now are integrating how they do use AI. So is there an opportunity for me to take advantage of either internal training or external training? There's a plethora of YouTube, Coursera, all of those things that for free with very low cost that you can get an introductory understanding of. Because then it shows that you are interested and you're trying to develop yourself and not just stay stagnant.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. Continuous learning, that's what we need more of. And there's no shortage of YouTube videos to help you with any of that stuff. All right, so this list, I'll make it available in the description. So it's probably going to look ugly, and that's just what it is, and that's fine. But hopefully it gives people some tips that they can use, they can go through as a reflection, and then they can look at steps they can take. All right. We land in the plane.
The thing to remember is you own your career.
We're ending it on that because that's just too good. No more, Karen.
Yeah.
What'd you say? What was the second thing?
And have a plan and work your plan. But at the end of the day, you own it.
Donezo. Okay. This is done. I'm not saying anything else. Karen, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.